Okay, so hi again. This video is going to be on actually assembling the flute and some little maintenance things that we have to do with our instrument. So theoretically, your students have been really patient. They've worked very hard with the head joint up until this point. So they're familiar with this piece. This is the head joint. And we talked about this in the other video too, that this is the lip plate, the crown, and then the actual head joint body. Okay. The other parts are the body that has most of the keys on it, and then the foot joint, right, which has your lowest notes on it. So the head, the body, the foot joint. The number one thing, again, when it comes to assembling the flute, make sure that everybody is sitting, or sitting on the floor is even better. I don't know what everybody's classrooms will look like. They're all going to be a little different, but if it's at all possible to do this on carpeting, even better, because this is an all metal instrument. Dropping it doesn't necessarily mean it won't play. There's a lot that you can break on here, first of all. And when you drop an instrument or when you dent an instrument, the metal that was previously tight kind of dents, right? And then you can fix it. You can pop it back out, but then the metal fatigues because the fibers aren't quite where they were, before the accident. So best to try to keep everybody as close to the floor as possible for this. So number one thing is that we have junction points for this instrument. These are called tenons, okay? And they are the points at which we have another joint kind of coming into play. What you want to do, you first of all never want to use cork grease or any kind of external grease on these joints. The oil in your hands is enough. So I like to oil that one joint, and then same with this tenon here, the barrel, if you want to call it that. We don't really call it the barrel, but it's something like the barrel, and make those kind of lubricated. And then I take the foot joint first, and I put my thumb over the keys. Okay, so you don't ever want to grab like this, because then you'll be potentially bending them. You want to grab where you don't have keys, but then your thumb needs to go somewhere. So I just keep them, on those keys and keep the keys down. Okay, and then we take the bottom end and the foot joint and make sure that they're not coming at each other for an angle. This is what students do all the time when they're getting ready for band. They're just throwing their instrument together and they kind of do this. This metal is thin enough that it can warp pretty easily. And so doing this to put the flute together over and over and over is going to actually round that off. And then pretty soon you're going to get a loose foot joint. And so students that say, hey, my foot joint's coming off, or it doesn't want to stay, or whatever, that's usually the problem, is that they've put that joint together at an angle enough times that the tenon begins to round and it's not making contact the way it needs to. The only way to fix that is to go to a repair person that can straighten it back out. But again, like I just said, metal fatigues pretty easily. So there's only so much bending and straightening we can do with that tenon before it will fall apart. Just like a paperclip. If you bend a paperclip back and forth and back and forth and back and forth enough times in the same spot, it's going to break. So it's the same kind of concept. So what we want to do is be very careful. And here as well, I actually like to hold my body joint on the label. So body joint, foot joint with the thumb on the keys, and then putting these two together at the exact angle of each piece and twisting. It's very important to twist also. If you push on, you could scratch the metal or, again, dent something that you don't want to dent. So as you're assembling this, note that the rods, which are these long pieces here, they do not line up with these two joints. That's okay. That's supposed to happen. Okay. So the way that this is the right hand of the flute here. Okay. So do it this way. Basically, your fingers are going to go here and your pinky needs to play this key. So what I like to do is I take this bottom rod and I line it up with the center of my ring key. And so that keeps it kind of in alignment. Now, again, everybody has a different length pinky finger. And to some extent, your length of your ring finger is going to determine where that foot joint goes to. So it can vary. Okay. Your mileage may vary on this one, but that's a good place to start, is to put that rod right in the center of the ring key. Okay. So now we've got that, and we're keeping our hand on our label, our name. My flute name is Straubinger. Okay. And we take the head joint. Now the head joint doesn't have any keys, so we can kind of hold it wherever we want to, but I like to hold it again, kind of on the label. And this tenon, again, you could use your fingers if you need to make sure that it's lubricated. We want to put it together with the body and twist. Okay. So now, getting the head joint in alignment with the body is sometimes a little bit more tricky, because everybody has different size chins and different bottom lips. And so again, mileage might vary, but what I do is I look down the flute, right, with one eye, and I can see that my aperture hole up here is mostly in alignment with this very first key down here, my C sharp key. So I'm kind of looking down, and it's about in the right spot. If you have very young students, it is not critical, but maybe a good idea to mark this place for them. Okay. Sometimes young flutists will play on student flutes that have little markings already, like Yamaha has little triangles that you can line up on the instrument. A lot of people will put nail polish on it, just a little dab here and a little dab here, one on each joint, so that it's just a place where the students can easily see, okay, yeah, this is lined up, because it's hard maybe to look down the barrel of the flute and try to line things up that way. However, I think even if you put a mark, it is good to make sure you tell the students, look, this is just a guideline. You know, there are days when you're going to have chapped lips and you're going to have to move your head joint one way or the other. Or there's days when, you know, you're going to maybe feel like it's riding too high and needs to come down. Or maybe we marked it a little bit too high and now you're growing and now you need to move it, right? So there are all kinds of different scenarios where that can change. And of course, nail polish will just come off with some acetone. So that's good to do. I've even done this with little pieces of Scotch tape and Sharpie. Because if you put Sharpie right on here, it will mark it, but it actually rubs off very easily. So Scotch tape, for whatever reason, seems to kind of keep it a little bit longer. Otherwise, it's okay to use some other, marker on your instrument to kind of make sure that joint's lined up. Now, the foot joint goes into the body joint 100%. We line up those pieces end to end, okay? The head joint, however, is how we tune our instrument, right? So as we are, trying to figure out if we're sharp or flat, and it's very easy on flute to do this. We're going to talk about it at length in another video. But the bottom line is, if you are sharp, your instrument's too small and you need to lengthen the tube. And so you pull the head joint out. If you're flat, your tube is too long and you need to shorten your instrument up, make a smaller instrument, essentially, to make a higher sound. So you push the head joint in. However, the flute is not meant to be played with the head joint pulled very far out or really pushed all the way in. We can play pushed all the way in. That's not so much of a problem. But if you pull it out beyond about 1/4 of an inch, we start to get way, way out of tune. So what I tell my students is this little line, there's a little like buffing line here on the head joint. You want that to be somewhere between 1/8 to 1/4 of an inch pulled out. Okay. And again, as you're pulling and pushing the head joint, you're twisting it. So as you twist it, you might have to realign it with, with the keys. So, so that's the basic, ABCs of how to put your instrument together. Again, no cork grease. We don't use cork grease at all. Maintenance wise, there are a couple things to think about with maintenance. One is that usually there's some amount of silver on your flute. And so it's going to be, potentially it's going to tarnish, okay? There are loads of products on the market that are silver polishing cloths or material that has some sort of chemical coating in it for the silver in your flute. It's fine to use those. I would stay away from silver strips because those are meant to cut down on tarnish that happens in the case. Problem is those strips give off some of that that chemical, to prevent the tarnish, and it's not great for your pads. And so it's fine to use a little bit of silver tarnish cloth. Just make sure as you're doing it, look at all of these little places in here. Mine's obviously tarnished. It's because you really can't get in there, with a silver tarnish cloth, with any cloth. And I have a pinless mechanism, but I still have some springs. You see those little steel springs there? Those are very easy to catch on a cloth and bend or twist or rip or tear. So, so my advice is go ahead and wipe it down. That's fine. You probably want to wipe off the silver tarnish stuff that you get just to make sure that, that it's not reacting with you, because that can irritate some people's skin, and make sure that it's not on your pads. And that's good too. However, you don't want to go nuts trying to get into these little crevices. There's no way to do it without taking the flute apart. And so that's where our annual clean oil adjust comes in. So if you have a maintenance person or a repair person that you trust, or your teacher can recommend, or that maybe your school works with, they can do what's called a COA. And every year we should get a COA done on our flutes. You can push it to 18 months, depending on what your schedule is, because you're going to be without your instrument for a week. And what they do is they are trained and certified to basically unhook all of the springs, take off the keys, take off the rods until you're down to just the tube. And they will literally give your flute a bath. And that's fine. We don't have, besides the keys, we don't have anything on here that's water sensitive. So it's totally fine, as long as the keys are removed, to submerge your flute in water and just brush it. So that's what they do. And then generally speaking, they will do some silver tarnish, stuff to it, and then re-oil all of the rods. This is the only place in your instrument that has oil. They'll re-oil that usually with 2-stroke lawnmower oil or clock oil, something synthetic, usually, which is less goopy and gummy than most of the oil that you're going to buy, in Yamaha cleaning kits and stuff. And they will oil it the proper amount and then put it in. Now, I do not generally advocate for oiling your flute yourself unless you are a trained person and know how to take everything apart, put it back together, and oil it properly. If you have a squeaky key, or a key that you feel like just isn't quite moving the way that it needs to move, and maybe you suspect that it needs some more oil, best to take it to a shop so they can take it apart correctly and then put it back with the oil on it. If you just drip oil, like it says you can, from cleaning tools into these little crevices, it may get worked in, it may not. Theoretically, it's a closed system, although that isn't what happens in reality all the time. But honestly, probably it will just make the problem worse, because now you're going to have a goopy, gummy part of the rod instead of consistent oil among the whole rod, when it comes to the mechanisms that operate our keys. So that's the body joint. Now, the only other thing that we didn't really talk about is the actual pads. You might have a sticky pad or a dirty pad, and you can take pad paper. I don't know that I have any pad paper, but I can demonstrate with a Post-it note here. Pad paper is normally very, very thin. It's cigarette paper, not this. This is a little bit too thick. But what you can do is put the paper under the sticky pad, close the key, yank on it, just try to get the dirt loosened a little bit, and then open the key and pull out the paper. You don't want to take it and pull it while you're pressing down on it, because that could tear your pad. Pads are made in many, many, many layers. They have something underneath them called shims, and then they're being held in place in these open holes anyway with something called a grommet. And so you have the potential to rip the pad, You know, when you pull papers like that across it, rip the pad, and then the pad is susceptible to moisture, right? So anytime you play and have condensation, it's going to potentially take on the condensation. It might swell, and then the shims and the grommet are going to be affected underneath that. And potentially what will happen is you'll have a leak. So in order to avoid that, we don't want to pull paper. You can blot, right? Blotting's fine, totally fine. But yeah, not a pulling thing. Let's see. The last thing to talk about is cleaning the inside of the flute. So everyone should have a cleaning rod that comes with their instrument. Okay. And they all look a little different, but they all essentially have the same stuff on them. What you want is to get a clean handkerchief and your cleaning rod. I'm going to put this on my stand here for a minute and take the flute apart piece by piece, just like we put it together. We are going to twist and take the pieces apart. So we take the foot joint and we twist, do that. And we take the body joint, we twist, and then the head joint is by itself. So what you will do, teach your students to do, is take their handkerchief, okay? I've even seen people tear up t-shirts and things like that, and it works well to do that. And this looks like a needle. So you're going to thread it through the eye of the needle. Okay. I usually twist it over the top so that I don't scratch my instrument. And then you basically take it inside and twist and get all the water out. Okay. There are all kinds of other devices on the market that you can use for this. In fact, I have one here I can show you. This is called a flute flag. Okay. And it does essentially the same thing. You know, put it in, and then you twist, it gets the water out. It's microfiber on a stick. Okay. However, the cleaning rod, and of course you can do that with all the joints, right? The body and the foot joint as well. The cleaning rod is important for another piece of maintenance, and that is making sure that the cork is in the right place. So if you look, there's a little notch up here, right there, okay, on the cleaning rod. It is in the same place for any cleaning rod. So the rod that did not come with your flute, you know, say your friend 2 seats over has a cleaning rod and you want to borrow that person's, fine. Okay, this is a standard notch. And the reason why it's standard is because it is the same distance from the top of the rod to this notch as it is the width of your head joint. Okay, interior width of the head joint. So, and that's a standard width. So any cleaning rod will do. What you want to do to check, let's just say your intonation is way off and you have to feel like you're pulling way out to play in tune, maybe. And again, we'll talk about this in another video at length, but you put your cleaning rod in to check the cork. And it's hard to see here because there's not a lot of light, but the notch is right in the center. My notch is right in the center of my aperture hole. Okay, that's because the distance of the bottom of the cork in our head joint down to the center of the aperture hole is the same distance as the width of the head joint. So that's why that works to do that with the notch. We are going to talk in another video about how to move the cork and, you know, if you have issues with the cork, what to do about it. But for now, as far as maintenance goes, know that that is how you check the cork is with this cleaning rod, and that the cork is actually in here at the top of your head joint. And be careful about students who get bored in class and start playing with the crown of their flute. It's very easy to mess around with this. It's just on a screw in the middle of the head joint. And you can potentially thread the cork that's on that screw a little bit too far north, and then you get problems with intonation because it's not the right distance from the center of the aperture hole. So that's basic maintenance. I think the rule of thumb is less is more. Don't use gummy, you know, key oil, especially from other instruments. Don't use cork grease. The oil from your hands is enough, and make sure that you always swab out whenever you're done playing.